No, I don't know either. I'm right, everybody. Welcome to SPSM. April did it again. She does it every week. She thinks it's hilarious.
I do.
My God,
she's
stuck it
in like the last 30 seconds before the show starts.
I don't think it's funny.
I think
let's hope.
Hey everybody, you stumbled in. It's 9 o'clock, 9 p.m. Central Time, 10 o'clock Eastern. God only knows what, 7 Pacific? Who knows what's happening if you're like in Alaska. And you come into the suicide prevention social media chat, hashtag SPSM. I am at Doc Foreman. We could be wearing all sorts of hearts and red and pink and getting ready for Valentine's Day, but who wants to do that? That's boring. Nobody gives a shit about Valentine's Day. Can we all be real about that? It's a Hallmark holiday, but you know what we do care about? Here in Louisiana, it is carnival season. It's been the Mardi Gras. We're all out at the parades. And so I thought I would get dressed up because it's a very special SPSM. Much like standing on the side of the road in New Orleans, waiting for the tons and tons of beads to come flying at your face. Instead, Fart's going to fling a little knowledge at us and hit us square in the eyes, talking about suicide prevention history. And he and Chris are going to be doing a very special style of podcast. Remember, we talked about sort of this being the year 2017 and 2018, year of the podcast. Podcast use has really taken off. Largely because it's something that you can do while you're exercising, while you're driving, while you're running the errands. It takes way less bandwidth. It's something that's easy to download. And it can be very engaging and entertaining. You can get podcasts in the field that you love. Some people even listen to SPSM as a podcast, like they play on the YouTube and they listen while they drive. But there is a particular podcast in the last year that has totally taken over the SPSM production crew, and they're totally in love with the style. I love a history podcast, but they love a specific history podcast. I will let them tell you about it. I'm at Doc Foreman. I'm going to be your moderator, but I'm not hanging around for most of tonight. Mostly, I'm going to be on Twitter helping moderate. Mr. Tony Wood, introduce yourself to the people.
Hey, everybody. I'm Tony Wood. I'm the chair of the board of the American Association of Suicidology, suicidology.org. Join today. You could also donate your data at ourdatahelps.org. Ourdatahelps.org. I'm the COO of Quantify. I think it's called Our Data Helps, Chris.
I like it.
.org.
And do you listen to the Dollop? Tony, are you a Dolloper?
I am not as frequent a Dolloper as our friends Bart and Chris are.
I learned things about the assassination of Abraham Lincoln I can't unlearn or unthink.
Which side are you on?
I am on the side of helping people with mental illness, which turned out to be an important element of the story. Dr. Bart Andrews.
I, Dr. Bart Andrews, puppy snuggler, intrepid explorer of Topeka, and safe messaging skeptic.
What do you think about Topeka?
From the history. Topeka, you're blowing the spiel here, Foreman. We got a spiel here. This is a new day. This is a new show.
Should I? All right.
Here, Foreman. This is progress. We're moving forward. I was at the Topeka Ramada Inn. If you've never been at the Topeka Ramada Inn, you need to spend some time there because it's special. It's a special place, and it's hard to and it's hopping. I will say that every night I was there, there was events of every sort going on at the Topeka Ramada Inn.
As well as parasites.
It's a Topeka, so it's a really interesting place. I will say the Topeka tourism industry was there. They're a hopping and hip group of septuagenarians that are really trying to promote Kansas across the nation.
Come to see the construction on our main street.
They did. They brought in a drag racer for the event and some kind of a tiger that I still don't quite get the connection between the
wildcat.
But it wasn't blue. It was yellow. It was yellow and black. Tony says the wildcat is blue.
It's purple.
No.
It's purple and white.
It was yellow. This
was the wrong colors.
This tiger furry I don't really understand it. Anyway,
I assume
we're starting this one.
I assume that it is the new mascot of the Topeka Tourism Bureau.
Was it the Mizzou Tiger?
You're
Ollie.
That's the wrong state, April.
Damn it.
It's literally in Missouri. Okay, Bart. Okay, so this is where we begin to dollopize the show. So Bart.
Of course, right now I'm having bandwidth issues.
If I turn mine down.
Perfect.
While Bart adjusts his bandwidth, Chris Maxwell, can you tell everybody what the Dollop is and what roles you and Bart are going to be playing today?
So the Dollop is a great podcast that is done by Dave Anthony and Gareth Reynolds. If you're at all interested in history or the history of the U.S. and actually a lot of history of Australia, they've done some podcasts on the history, some history stories from Canada and places in the Netherlands and Iceland. So they've done a lot of different stories. But what they do is Dave Anthony is a comedian, Gareth Reynolds is a comedian, and Dave will read a story from American history to Gareth, and Gareth has no idea what the topic is going to be about. So it's hilarious in that Gareth gets to react and he gets to have fun with the story, all while we learn about American history and Bart falls asleep.
But suicide and discussing suicide has zero humor in it, Chris. So this can't possibly work for us.
I don't know.
It's pretty clearly not going to work. Yes, I think that's been demonstrated pretty early on. That in fact the entire format that we discussed earlier has completely fallen apart.
Go for it, Bart.
No, it's okay. No, it's all right. No, I don't want to do it anymore. I've spent a lot of time here. I've had time to process it.
No. You have to do it. You have to do it.
I think we try. I think we can say we tried. We gave it a good faith try, Chris. I think in the end, sometimes people aren't ready. You know, there's a time and a place for everything, and sometimes
to each thing there's a season, says Bart Andrews.
It's kind of biblical in a way.
Uh-huh.
Are we gonna?
Okay, so now we've had some dead air time. Bart Andrews, would you do the intro for Christ's sake?
Dr. Bart Andrews, puppy snuggler, intrepid explorer of Topeka, and safe messaging skeptic, will tell a story from the history of mental health treatment to my friend
Chris Maxwell, who has no idea what the topic is going to be about.
Also joining us are Dr. April Foreman and the Tony Wood. But first, before we go into a lot of this history that we're going to talk about today, I'd like to thank our sponsors, Dank Memes. Dank Memes is, in fact, sponsoring this particular SPSM chat. We're calling this chat the Fixation. The Fixation is where SPSM takes time to explore the sometimes wild and wacky history of mental health treatment and suicide prevention. So imagine you're the head of a large organization or a country, and you're just dealing with lots of stuff. Let's say, for instance, your right-hand man in the office turns out to have beaten up several of his wives.
Seems rather specific.
But you just it's not that specific. This could be anybody. Let's just say that you're a very important person, and your right-hand man has beaten up multiple people with pictures, but he's a good guy, and you really like him. And so you've been cutting him some slack because you really do. You know that he's a good person deep down inside. But that pesky press got a hold of some photos and some interviews. And so you've got to fire him, right? So you're just really stressed about this. So what do?
Bart,
you go
this
to Dank Memes.
Really specific.
No, this could be about anybody. This could be Chris. This could really. It's not that specific. This could be anybody. You're stressed out about the stock market dropping. You're stressed out about all kinds of things.
That sounds familiar too.
You go to our sponsor, Dank Memes. You can learn about who would win. You can learn about the guys only want one thing, and it's disgusting. You can also learn about the dangers of cursing on a Christian Minecraft server. Look, Dank Memes is fun for everyone. Kids, adults, grandmas. So if you get a
maybe
chance,
not any of those people.
If you get a chance, you should go ahead and check out Dank Memes because it's a wonderful, family-friendly entertainment spot that all can enjoy.
Don't let your
family sponsored by Xhamster.
You don't agree
today.
June 6, 1900. Ned Verna, Austria, Hungary, Poland, or Ukraine. We can talk about that a little bit. This is really interesting. Ned Verna, sometimes it was in Austria-Hungary. Sometimes it was in Poland. Now it's in the Ukraine. It's
people
really
get
hard
confused.
to know.
Is that what happened?
And
They just kind of lost track of the history books.
Ned
Is that
Verna
is that what's going on?
Ned Verna is a city that gets around, Chris Maxwell.
It gets around.
Menachem Sokol was born June 6, 1900. Menachem Sokol.
Hold on. So can we back up a minute? Menachem Sokol.
Menachem. Listen, Christoph. Menachem Sokol. Menachem Sokol. Christoph. Now, but at some point, Menachem changes his name to Manfred Joshua Sokol. Remember that name, Manfred Joshua
well, this seems like a
Sokol. Manfred. The Manfred Man Band is not named after this Manfred. We don't think.
I'm going to change my name to Manfred.
We don't know. It could be the Manfred Man Band in Poland, and then they could also have a cover band in Austria.
Manfred Mansky, Bandowski could be a Polish rock band that we've never heard of. That is correct. Look, we know nothing about Manfred's childhood for the most part, and his family history, except we know a few things. He was very much embarrassed of his father, who was ostentatiously a Jewish and a very, very traditional Jewish man. And in fact, later in his life, when Manfred was quite wealthy and living in New York City, he refused to move his father to New York City to live with him, even though he had plenty of money to do so. Right? He did claim now Manfred does claim that his family was descended from the philosopher/physician Maimonides. I'm not really sure. He was the Maimonides, Tony. He claims that his family. He claims his family was descended from the philosopher physician Maimonides, who was the head of the Jewish community in Egypt in the Middle Ages. Maimonides, little known fact, Tony Wood, Maimonides was also known as Rambam.
Rambam.
But no, I like Rambam better. What do you say?
Rambam.
Now, was this his Twitter? Was that his Twitter name, or
you're saying it's Rambam?
I think it's Rambam.
I like Rambam better. Most known for the maxim. Are you ready for this? This is the maxim he's most known for. You've heard this before. It is better and more satisfactory to acquit 1,000 guilty persons than to put a single innocent person to death. Sound familiar, folks? That's some damn goodness right there, SPSMers.
Rambam
Maimonides.
Now,
it's often misattributed because of the spelling problem.
And
the spelling can contribute to in his Twitter handle back then. Twitter was mostly clay tablety, and so Twitter was a little slow, and there was lots of room for error. But even back then, Jack, you could edit your tweets. But it's 2018, but we haven't gotten around to that, have we? Okay, everybody.
The trolls with Twitter back then, the Russians would just come over and steal the tablet from you and write on it.
The Russian fake tweets back in medieval Egypt was a huge problem. It brought down many. I don't know what they called their kings back then. They're not pharaohs anymore.
Ham-handed. It was a problem.
Rambams.
So where do we get to the part about mental illness?
Hambams.
Well, we're getting there. We finally pick up on Manfred's trail at the University of Vienna. So he goes from Ukraine, Poland, Austria to the University of Vienna, where he studied neurology and neuropsychiatry, graduating in 1925.
So he's currently. I'm just going to do an age check. He's 25, and he's graduated from Viennese.
Which back in the 1900s was like 50. So I think we need to hold. When you're that's like 45 or 50 in modern day years. Now he did begin working at a private psychiatric sanitarium outside of Berlin, and this is where the story would get interesting.
Would get interesting.
So it gets interesting. Manfred. Insulin was discovered in 1922.
What?
Insulin was discovered in 1922. Now, this is something that we need to think about in terms of psychiatry and neurology. We didn't have any of the minor or major tranquilizers back in the 20s. We didn't have a lot of things that to treat people with, and people kind of experimented with insulin. Now,
it was a miracle drug of the time.
Now Manfred started experimenting on insulin with dogs,
why would you go with dogs first? Why would you? Okay, you know what? Let's find the most cuddly. creature.
Just think about this for a minute. Can you imagine Manfred's talking to his friend Johann and is telling, he says to Johann, you said you were going out of town this weekend. Do you need somebody to dog sit for you, Johann?
So he's like in medical school in Austria, like knocking dogs out with insulin?
So he's working on dogs. And one of his friends described Manfred as, this was the word that was used in 1925, flaky. Manfred was a little flaky. And he got the idea that maybe you could calm people down with insulin. And
is that because they pass out if you give them enough of it?
If you get,
not only was Manfred a little bit flaky.
This is hot stuff. This is hot stuff back in the 20s.
Not only was Manfred flaky, but he was just the worst dog walker.
Now listen. No, wait. This is important. So Manfred is treating high-end clientele in the Roaring 20s Berlin. I'm not sure if Berlin was roaring in the 20s. I think it was a pretty rough place in the 20s. This is post-World War I, pre-rise of Hitler. Things are a little rocky in Berlin. And in fact, there's a huge.
This is cabaret time. This was crazy. This post-war, everybody was thrilled. The war's over. It's never going to happen again. But Germany's in a little rough shape.
Germany's in rough shape.
He's like, everyone's depressed. Let's like knock them out with insulin.
So he's there's a raging heroin problem going on in Berlin. He's treating lots of high-end patients who are struggling with heroin addiction. With insulin. Now, so here's the deal with insulin. You give people insulin, you bring their sugar levels down enough, you bring their heart rate down enough, and they kind of chill out. They get a little more manageable, right?
They get a little pre-death.
We're gonna get there. This is good stuff.
Isn't that called a coma?
Yeah, we're not there yet. Hold on.
Sleep. All right.
We're getting to this. So Manfred is imagine you're a doctor, you're a psychiatrist, you're trying to make your mark, and you've come up with this new thing. So you're giving people insulin to slow them down a little bit. They're struggling with addiction. Well, Manfred in 1927 is treating a relatively famous actress in Berlin and she's got a serious heroin addiction problem. Manfred's giving her the old, I don't know if it was Angelina Jolie, but it might have been her grandma. Anyway, so Angelina Jolie's grandma is going to see Manfred for heroin addiction. And he's given her the old insulin treatment to knock her down a peg or two. But he overdoes it, and he puts her in a coma.
This is
no worries.
You come to me.
No worries, folks.
You can just sleep it off.
He puts her in a coma. He panics. He gives her the glucose injection. So they're injecting people with insulin. He gives her the glucose. He brings her out of the coma. And she has this kind of wakes up from the coma, and her cravings for heroin are gone. Her personality has changed. She's not being driven by the thirst for heroin. She's not itchy, scratchy, restless. She's feeling pretty good. She's got a new outlook on life.
How's the brain damage?
Insulin
by the way,
is a
Stop
nice...
Texas Suicide is tweeting out articles showing the link between diabetes, insulin, and mental illness sort of treatments. Anyway, keep going.
So this is most likely the true version of the first time that he put someone in an insulin coma. And he has created what becomes known as insulin shock or insulin coma therapy. And what ends up happening is insulin shock therapy, insulin coma therapy comes to be a really big deal. In fact, Manfred is going gangbusters in Berlin with this new technique, right? Now, this is really important.
Can I ask a question? I'm gonna ask a question because it sounds like so they have to do an insulin push and then a glucose push, right? Like they have to do a balancing act. They bring them back after this.
Okay,
right?
So we're gonna talk about, well, let's talk about what actually, here's what the treatment actually entails. So here's if you want to find out what insulin coma therapy actually is, here's what Manfred's.
They could have really worked on like
when I get into
this. Like they could have really like insulin coma therapy, like insulin happy fun time nap time, like make it a little bit more appealing.
Yeah.
Like
when you hear about the actual treatment, you're going to realize that this would be a pretty hard thing to market. Okay, so we'll skip ahead. We'll go back. Well, here's what the treatment actually is. It's 4 stages to the insulin shock treatment. This is Manfred's baby. Manfred created this, folks. Manfred.
4 simple steps.
4 simple steps.
Did he have a deal? Did he have a deal with needle manufacturers? Like, is this
the insulin? They got insulin. Hey, I know. Do you know how they extracted insulin? You know where it came from?
It came from like sheep or pigs' pancreases.
Organs. Yeah, they had to actually harvest organs from animals that were slaughtered, and then they squeeze it down. Today they have bacteria that just spits it out, but.
Yeah, Manfred may have been.
But then it was a really arduous, very expensive, by the way.
Sounds
very
expensive.
So that's why it's like a boutique. It was sort of like pate, but for your coma.
It was kind of a pig pate coma treatment.
Meanwhile, there are diabetics all across Austria-Hungary just dropping dead because they don't have any insulin.
This is like wealthy boutique mental illness treatment.
Yeah, this is
what people are paying for. This is
fancy rehab kind of like horse riding and an insulin coma. Okay.
Okay. Here's and this is
therapy and insulin death.
Right.
You're gonna love the therapy. Are you ready?
Okay. 4 steps. Step 1.
4 steps for 2 weeks. For 2 weeks, you administer increasingly higher doses of insulin. So every day. Manfred's in there. We're gonna go higher. We're gonna go higher. Right now, you're basically getting the person kind of insulin juiced up, right? Which gets
the Michael Jacksons of Berlin.
Yeah, this is bad. You know that he knows when he's getting close to the right dose when he starts creating what's called insulin shock. And insulin shock is when you start sweating profusely and may end up in a coma. Boom, right there. We're once you've induced, been doing enough insulin injections for a couple of weeks, and when you inject the person with the insulin and they just start pouring sweat, or they kind of fall over into a coma, you're ready for stage 2.
Step 2.
Chris,
I like how step 1 is just. Step 1 is just like, let's dehydrate you as much as possible. You fall over. Like, we have to have a trampoline ready for you at this point. So I assume step 2 is probably just hitting them in the face.
No. Like, step 2 gets better. Once they're clearly demonstrating that they have enough insulin buildup to be easily put in insulin shock, then we hit stage 2, Christoph. In stage 2, you then start giving them enough insulin to push them into a coma, and you do that 2 or 3 times a day. So the person, you give them an injection, they drop into a coma.
And if they start to come out of it, you do it again.
They come out of it, you do it again. You do this 2 to 3 times a day, and you do it for 2 to 4 days.
Is that not how you guys go to sleep?
No, not even once.
I think we should call it
Amber Cannon tweeted, but would this not be the same as a medical induced coma that's still practiced?
No.
We do. Well, we do it differently.
No, it is not the same.
It's a medically induced coma, Tony. It's by any other name is a rose not as sweet.
It is not.
Okay.
Because of the organ damage.
So after you've put the person in a coma 2 to 3 times a day, maybe 4 times a day, for 2 or 3 days, you then remove all insulin. You let them rest, right? And then they'll give them a little break. And then you start giving them more insulin again. And then
just a minute, is this step 3?
This is step 4. Step 3 is rest.
Step 3 is rest. Step 4.
Finally, we got
is giving them insulin at near to the highest level you were giving it to them before they were in a coma, and then gradually reducing their insulin level over time. Now, he found.
And I'm asking the question everybody wants to know the answer to, which is how much could he bill for this?
Yeah, we're gonna get there a lot. When you find out how much he made in New York City, you're gonna fall over. He
made lots for this.
And so these are this is like mood problems who are like agitated, right?
These are people with addiction, active addiction issues. This is not mood issues.
He was primarily people with addiction and other things in Berlin. But that's not convenient. You're going to find out why. All right.
Okay.
So he found out this was very effective. And in fact, he claims that he had an 88% recovery rate with his insulin coma therapy. Right?
What?
Now, yeah, 88% recovery rate.
Oh, 88?
88%? Pretty good.
Right, I like that number. It's almost like he made it up.
You can't argue with 88% recovery rate, Tony.
Yeah, I didn't think so. No.
It's a pretty good recovery rate. Now, there's some things that get pointed out. Manfred, one of the things he pointed out in some of the documentation they did found is that seizures were to be avoided. Seizures were bad. You didn't want seizures, right?
Agreed.
And often people would seize up. People would seize up in this, right? And sometimes
an
also
unfortunate side effect that we can't avoid.
Yeah, sometimes people would have seizures, and that was to be avoided. Also, sometimes people died. Maybe
so it's important to get the money up front, is what you're saying.
Maybe 5 to 10.
That's the other.
Maybe of the survivors.
Maybe up to 5
because
to
that's
10% of his patients died. Think about that. 5 to 10% of his patients may have died from the treatment.
Yeah.
Now, this is huge. This is absolutely huge. In fact, this gets so big that he gets lured from Austria to New York City. And there's a 1937 Time magazine article about insulin coma therapy.
Now, he was in Berlin or Austria?
He was in Berlin. He was in Berlin.
Okay. He went to Austria to study with Freud or whatever.
Freud
is like middle-aged at this point.
He was at Vienna in the 2019 to 2025, so he might have overlapped with Freud there. Certainly possible.
Freud, that was the hot deal, right? And was Viennese psychiatry.
If he was there, he would have overlapped with someone from that era, right?
Oh yeah, Jung and Freud and all that crowd was all there at the same time.
Now we're gonna do some backtracking because while Manfred is doing his insulin shock therapy to treat people with addiction and having gangbuster results, there is a Hungarian psychiatrist, Laszlo Meduna. Laszlo Meduna, born in 1896. Laszlo noticed while working in sanitariums that schizophrenia and epilepsy rarely existed in the same person at the same time. And he noticed
it was like Superman. It was like Superman and Clark Kent.
So maybe it could be superhero, extra special power type things. But he also noticed several things. He notices that the natural incidence that you should see of epilepsy in the community, you don't see in psychiatric hospitals where people are being boarded with schizophrenia. You just don't see a lot of epilepsy. He also observed several cases of people diagnosed with schizophrenia who have seizures and then have a complete remission from their schizophrenia symptoms following their seizures, right? So there's some other things going on with this. That even though physiology was relatively new, particularly small cell physiology, there was good evidence to show that people that had seizure disorder, epilepsy, had lower levels of glial cells, and that people with schizophrenia had higher levels of glial cells. So Laszlo had a hypothesis that seizures increased the number that could increase the number of glial cells. So schizophrenia had less glial cells, seizures had more glial cells. Yep.
Oh no.
So he
finally they just got
experiment.
a finger on the CNS. They've got the nervous system all figured out. I got a microscope and I got food coloring and I'm ready to go.
And IRB approval, so much IRB approval.
Oh, you don't need that. That's
Laszlo begins experimenting with camphor and cardiazol/metrazole, which are chemical convulsants. So he starts like treating people.
Like when you have a cold sore?
Yeah, that's what camphor is.
Camphor can cause seizures. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Now Laszlo
Which
is
is why
very.
You shouldn't drink your lip balm.
You got it. Laszlo is very different than Manfred. Laszlo is not flashy. He's very research oriented, very detailed. He begins using very. He's very Craig Bryanish. He begins using
the ethical behavior, except that.
He starts noting and ramping up doses slowly. Starts doing experiments with the seizure inducing the convulsants. These medications are called convulsants, and he starts having major success in treating people with schizophrenia. In fact, his documented use of this on people in catatonic states was phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal.
Catatonia is a wonderful. If you give somebody a massive seizure, their catatonia just goes away,
and doesn't seem to return. So he was
for little bits of time before they die. Go ahead.
He had really good luck treating the schizophrenia and catatonia, and so he replicates his results. He's getting and also nobody's dying.
Scientist.
Nobody's dying for the most part with his convulsant treatment, and he's having really good results. Now, this is a problem because Manfred is in Berlin and he's raking in the bucks and all the attention, and he hears about Laszlo. He hears about Laszlo and he freaks out because he wants credit for this. His insulin coma therapy is the shit, and he doesn't want Laszlo taking the limelight.
And so he needs a new product.
So he pushes out a paper. He pushes out a paper in 1935 that says he invented this and that he's the one that came up with seizure-induced treatment, and he changes the story. So remember I told you the story about the Berlin actress who was addicted to heroin? That's not the real story anymore. The real story.
No, she had catatonia.
No, Manfred is saying that the first person he did this with had schizophrenia.
Oh, of course.
It was a young man who was fighting schizophrenia, and he used insulin coma therapy to induce seizures, which caused a sudden decrease in his symptoms, increase in his functioning, and bada boom, bada bing, he's invented seizure therapy.
You know, right around the turn of the century, there were some really exciting technologies that were headed toward the market, because I'm beginning to believe that I know where we're headed here.
So maybe. So here's what happens.
Don't worry. And to everybody out there in Twitter land, we totally get it that some of you are asking for diagrams. You're not sure what we're heading. That is part of the journey, is that you have to sort of play along and see if you can figure this out. Please put your guesses, tweet your guesses out along the way.
Yeah, you're not going to.
It's solved at the end. We tell you the story. We tell you, just like a real mystery. You learn the answer at the end.
So we've got these two different psychiatrists, one who's using convulsants, one who's using insulin coma, and Laszlo is really doing really dedicated, rigorous scientific research. He's following evidence-based practices. He's documenting his stuff
all the time. Let's keep the frame here.
Meanwhile, Manfred.
These would still be considered illegal human experiments by today's standards.
Meanwhile, Manfred's only write-up at this point is a paragraph that he sent off to a journal that got published in 1930 or 31. Right? He's done there's no documentation. There's no method section. There's no detailed list of what he's doing.
He's enterprising. He's a doer. This is about being an American. This is a free enterprise.
Let's get some guns. Let's get some people. Let's get some needles. Let's all just.
We got the material. Just go for it.
Okay,
Yeah.
so here's where we end up. People, as this competition heats up, people are kind of really starting to side with Laszlo, because Manfred actually seems to lie a lot about things that he said he did, that he didn't do. The story keeps changing. And it seems like that, in fact, Laszlo's a pretty decent guy who's really documenting his stuff and has a good paper trail for his invention. Now, Manfred gets recruited by a psychiatrist in New York to come and work at this fancy clinic in Harlem, which is, in this time in the 30s, Harlem is a hopping, growing, extremely affluent part of New York City, right? Yep. He just goes gangbusters with insulin shock therapy. He published almost nothing. He complains while in New York City, complains constantly about Laszlo and being unfairly denied credit for his discovery. Meanwhile, he's amassing a small fortune. When he dies in 1957, are you ready for this? When he dies in 1957, he bequeaths $2 million. $2 million in 1957. That is a big chunk of change, by the way.
I don't know. Wipe your ass with it.
Well, I would take $2 million, April. I don't. Right. You may be living larger in Baton Rouge than I'm living here in Imperial.
Look at the gold hat is made of gold.
He left $2 million to his female friend and some sort of a endowment of some kind. Now,
just a lot of the endowment was just a lot of dead dog bodies and just like boxes of needles.
He claims credit for the use of convulsants. He claims credit for identifying that seizures can in fact provide relief to mental health. He also considered psychiatrists and mental health researchers who focused on academic research and good methods. He called them the sour honey of our field. That's sour honey,
but not honey pot.
It's there's no money in resery. Manfred's really
I think
clear
it might
that
say. I mean, I think it might sound better in an Austria-Hungary accent.
Say it.
Sour honey.
Sour honey.
Sour honey.
Sour honey.
This may be vaguely racist. I'm not clear.
Austria.
Sour honey.
Fritz, bring me the needles.
Now this is important. Laszlo also gets recruited. Laszlo gets recruited by the University of Illinois in Chicago, where he actually had a very prolific career. They have a
living people problem that they had to get rid of. Is that what they were dealing with?
No, remember, Laszlo was using convulsants. He's not using the insulin coma, the insulin shock therapy approach. He's not killing a lot of people, if any. I don't think there are any deaths attributed to Laszlo's treatment. He's having a lot of
the standards are real low.
This is in the 30s and 40s, and I think one of the things that we don't realize is back in this day that there was zero treatment for people fighting schizophrenia. Zero treatment. There was they locked these folks up. And catatonia, there was no treatment whatsoever for catatonia. And in fact, Laszlo's approach was fairly effective. So he also had a private practice. He also had a private practice in Chicago, but he only charged costs for his services, right? So meanwhile, while Manfred is raking in the dough, putting people in insulin comas in New York City, Laszlo's in Chicago. Laszlo's in Chicago, really helping people. Treat people the best he can. And
he's helping them have seizures.
Yeah, I'm waiting for something to come out about Laszlo, like he's, he steals limbs or something. Like there's something I don't like about this.
Laszlo's
an interesting place to go, Maxwell. Sorry, go ahead.
No, Laszlo's the hero of our story here. He was one of the main founders of the Society of Biological Psychiatry. Yeah, he discovered carbon dioxide treatment. We might do a show on carbon dioxide treatment. He also founded and created the diagnosis of oneirophrenia, which is sleep-induced psychosis. That some people have psychotic symptoms and it's connected to their sleep cycle, right? So he actually researched and created that diagnosis. Here's the other thing that where Manfred clung to his belief that insulin coma therapy was the shit until the very end. Into the 40s, they started using electroconvulsive shock therapy. When Laszlo got exposed, because they figured if you can cause convulsions with medications, maybe we could do this with electricity. When Laszlo saw
sort of a Logan Paul situation, is that what we're talking about?
Sort of.
Glad we didn't move forward with the electricity idea.
Well, we just wrap that up. We're
going to talk about that.
Mr. Sullivan, if you're interested, go ahead and shoot us some articles about ECT. Back to you.
And we're going and when he saw how much easier it was to control and how much more humane and easier to provide ECT, he completely bailed on the use of convulsant medications. He said that there's so many advantages. It's so much easier, more effective using electricity to produce these results.
To just shock the entire side of the brain. Just take this and
he found it was far superior. Now, here's the thing. There's some interesting things about these two men. They were both Jewish, by the way. In fact, near the end, Manfred was claiming that Laszlo was part of an anti-Semitic conspiracy to prevent Manfred from winning the Nobel Prize for inventing insulin coma therapy. Not making this up.
The Nobel, he was the Nobel Prize for this?
He was never close to winning the Nobel Prize, but he believed that Laszlo and a bunch of people who were Jewish were preventing him, another Jew, from winning the Nobel Prize for developing insulin coma therapy because he was Jewish. So Manfred had some.
So was he paranoid? Should he have had some of the stuff?
But was he the right kind of Jewish?
Yeah.
Clearly, that's what he was concerned about, right?
So anyway, eventually, now this is how big he was. There was a Time article, like 2-page Time article in 1937 dedicated to Manfred, right? And how amazing this insulin coma therapy was. And this is an article, this Times article actually ends
what year?
With what is it? Ellipses. The article actually ends with ellipses with this. We finally have a hope. We finally we're making progress in treatment of schizophrenia.
In Star Wars?
Right?
The New Hope. So what is this? What year is this in Time magazine?
1937, Time magazine.
1937.
So people were just, for this to be okay, people were incredibly desperate.
Uh-oh.
For treatment. Yeah.
But that's the thing is, like Bart was saying, that there's nothing there for these people. So why not?
So we're
this
all
is the infancy of psychopharmacology.
Right, we're all horrified, but the truth is that their alternative was worse than Manfred.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. In fact, even now it turns out when we go back and we look at Manfred's, when people started coming through Manfred's claims of an 88% success rate,
might have been less.
It turns out that it was 88% of the people that he decided to tell you about that got better.
That seems
it was a select sample of people who didn't die and also could still speak after the insulin therapy.
What sort of like stipulations does he put on that? Like, oh, it's a success because they can still walk.
That was in his method section. It was well reviewed by the IRB.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He wasn't just operating an independent clinic doing whatever he wanted. Not like, I don't know, Scientologists.
Yeah. And so one of the things that's really powerful about this is this is really interesting. Both Laszlo and Manfred were millennials. So this was 1896 and 1900 when these two were born. People don't realize how dramatically our knowledge base increased in the 1800s into the early 1900s, right? Literally, they were still bloodletting people in the early 1800s.
In the early 1900s.
By the time we, by the,
no cell biology,
no cell biology, no understanding of no understanding that the body was in fact a electrochemical in terms of its makeup. So these are both millennials who are growing up and being trained in medicine at the time that we're starting to finally recognize that the body is in fact a biological machine, right? This is all really new stuff, right? And as heinous as we find this, these two were pioneers in their day in terms of really making the connection between the mind, the body, the brain, and behavior. We didn't really get all of that before, right? Their work, especially Laszlo's work, led to the use of ECT. Now, people are going to rag on ECT, but I got news for you on ECT. It is, in fact, one of the most effective antidepressant and anti-suicide treatments that we have. It is now. It's shown time and time again to be superior to antidepressants. It doesn't even look like you need to try antidepressants first. The improvement in symptoms we get compared to antidepressants is significantly higher in a significantly quicker amount of time. It's also been shown in replicated studies to prevent suicide. Now, ECT got a really bad rap in the way that it was done and often misused. And if one flew over the cuckoo's nest, all that kind of stuff, right? But modern day ECT is in fact not particularly disruptive. Yeah. It's not. And in fact, people do
now. I'm aware of the new research. The problem is the 19th century, the 19th and early 20th century electroconvulsive therapy, they also had no muscle relaxers. So it just caused a body-wide spasm and often broke people's bones and did all kinds of horrible damage to them. It was very deeply painful. But today, they give you muscle relaxants, and so your muscles won't do that, and the treatment is
those broken bones, and the bruises and the bleeding from the face. Those were all just features. Features of the treatment.
They now localize ECT to a much smaller part of the brain.
Very small voltages.
I've worked with people who would go to ECT appointments, be home in the afternoon, and be fully functioning, aware, with very little memory deficit. And there are some folks who simply would not be alive today if it wasn't for ECT.
Oh, right? Absolutely.
It's an extremely effective treatment.
Author, I can't remember the guy's name.
And for someone Winchester. For someone who's experiencing depression that is just so resistant to treatment, and back when they were doing this, I mean, you are making an important point. And kudos to the members of our audience like Lisa Sullivan and Amber Cannon who are pointing this out. Like that this kind of stuff, as barbaric as the story Bart says, like the options were not great, and this did work and did relieve pain.
Yeah.
It does really work. And if you dig into the ECT literature, you'll find that we in fact could use ECT a lot more than we do. There's such a stigma. There's such stigmatization of ECT treatment that people are very reluctant to do it. And what the research shows that is in fact, you don't need to try all these different antidepressants, and it doesn't make a difference how many antidepressants you try before you use ECT. The results, it works quicker, it's more effective, and we haven't found a significant reduction in suicide that's connected to SSRI treatment. We have numerous studies supporting that ECT does in fact reduce the suicide rate in folks in randomized controlled studies. So ECT is an extremely effective tool, but there's so much energy and reaction against it. I love the Mad in America folks, but that crowd goes absolutely over the top angry when you mention ECT. But for many patients, it is what's keeping them alive. It's saving their lives and helping them live normal lives, right?
Sure.
So Amber Cannon was asking, is it only for lifelong depression? It's in fact, ECT can be used for anybody with it's got to be severe depression. They're not going to treat mild or even moderate depression. Although if someone had moderate depression that had been going on for years that was preventing them from living a normal life, I'm sure ECT is something that a good psychiatrist would consider. You have to have special training to give ECT. Not every psychiatrist obviously does ECT.
Well, you usually go to a special clinic. I don't know what they do like around your parts, but in the medical systems where I live, now I feel silly. I thought this was going to be sillier, and now I'm wearing a silly hat. But like there are just a couple referral clinics, and we might send some folks who might do it inpatient for several weeks. in like a Houston hospital. And then there was in Baton Rouge, like we had a facility for a while, and people, it was like a facility, a clinic that specialized in only ECT. Sorry.
Yeah. No. So Marcia Epstein's talking about that her small sample, that people who had ECT that wouldn't recommend it. There have been literally hundreds of studies. There are many people who have added ECT and it's changed their lives and helped them. So I get really worked up when you talk about people who didn't like it. There's people who don't like medications and don't want to take medications. This is all relevant, but the science behind ECT is very solid. And I think that there is an emotional and a cultural reaction against it because it's been so problematic, and the history is a bit problematic. But modern ACT is an effective and fairly safe treatment. And in fact, we don't get to fully utilize ECT because there's so much negative energy around it. Think about, do you know how many people I've run into?
Bad PR.
It's got horrible PR. Right?
But I think we could also say, like to Marcia's point, that there are definitely people who've had negative side effects, memory problems, bad experiences. But that's also the case with antipsychotic medications that might cause liver or other kinds of damage. It's the case with things like antidepressants, like some that have black box warnings, so you can take them and be at increased risk for suicide, so it could kill you. Like that, I mean, I think that's what's sort of problematic. That there's a lot about mental health treatment where the risks and benefits, like I don't know that it's every patient's experience if they go and the doctor says, well, here are 6 treatment avenues. Let's discuss the risks and benefits. Like, I don't think that happens a lot. What do you think, Bart?
I agree. And here's what's really interesting. When you look at patients who are fighting cancer, they are willing to do anything. We're talking about radiation. We're talking about using chemicals that the goal is that it kills the cancer before it kills you, right? We endorse, accept, promote extremely invasive surgeries that can kill you, right? For often very modest life-extending outcomes. But with something like ECT, people literally lose their shit about even talking about ECT and how horrible it is. That data doesn't support that. Yes, there are people who have bad experiences with ECT. There's people who have horrible experiences with chemotherapy, but we don't have huge groups that have traction out there saying, don't do chemotherapy because it's inhumane and it's going to kill you. Yeah, chemotherapy can kill you and make you miserable, but it helps some people.
But cancer can too, right?
It absolutely can too, and depression kills people. And so
it ruins their lives.
It absolutely destroys lives and kills them even if they're still walking around. They're not living a life. And so when it comes to people who aren't responding to traditional treatment, when they're not responding to medications, when they're not responding to therapy, I think that it's absolutely malpractice to not at least discuss and then have an open, honest conversation about the use of ECT. And I bet that doesn't happen very often, is my guess.
One of the things that's really occurring to me is like when people were feeling really desperate for solutions, you're telling me, and I feel like I got to take this hat off because I just can't think with it on. But you're telling me that they were willing to pay a lot of money for rather dubious options with rather slim outcomes just because they wanted to increase the chance of getting help, right? And I don't know, when it comes to depression, it seems as if, or, other like life-threatening, suicide risk elevating conditions, we don't say, well, you have, like with borderline personality disorder, you have a 10%, 3 to 10% chance of dying by suicide, right? You were diagnosed with a cancer that had that, and you said, here are the options, and they all have side effects, but we got to pick one, or you can, see what happens if you leave it untreated. Like, I don't know that you get those options in a therapy setting, right?
I don't think you do. And we really don't do enough training about refractory depression and depression that isn't responding to traditional treatment. And so what often ends up happening is that patients get blamed for not getting better. Some patients do not tolerate SSRIs at all. There are some people that simply can't take SSRIs. They don't respond to them, right? Now, and I think to kind of, I don't want to belabor this point, but it's really interesting. We would never, ever make someone feel bad because they had cancer and they did chemotherapy or radiation therapy or had major brain surgery to remove tumors. but people are so ashamed of ECT. Nobody who's getting cancer treatment is ashamed talking about their treatment. Well, I've got to go to chemo, or I've started radio. People have these open conversations, but for someone to openly talk about their ECT treatment is a big deal. People are really afraid to do it because there's so much prejudice and discrimination against it, that when it should be a much more normal part of our treatment process.
It's super weird too, because you think about some of the new stuff coming out about psilocybins and mushrooms and LSD and the treatment processes with those, and the really, really cool results that are coming out showing reductions in depression, reductions in anxiety, all of that. People are, and even with marijuana, people are really okay with talking about these kinds of potential experimental treatments, way more so than they are about ECT.
We are. And we need to have the same fearless, do whatever it takes approach to treating mental illness that we have towards cancer, right? Now, there's downsides of that as well, and overly aggressive treatment creates its own problems, but we could be getting a lot more people, a lot more effective treatments than we currently do in our current system. Ketamine is something that's showing some really good promise, right? There's lots of things that we could be doing, but most people who are fighting severe depression are, if you mentioned ECT to them, it's gonna blow their mind. It's gonna be a really big challenge, and part of it is all of the negative and prejudicial energy there's around this treatment. So these guys, I mean, so between Manfred and Laszlo, I really do like Laszlo. I think Laszlo was a dedicated researcher. He used scientific method. He published. He was balanced. He was as safe as you could be at the time. Manfred was a little bit edgier, took more chances, and maybe killed some people in the process. But both of them played a significant role in finding a technique for the first time that actually had some significant effectiveness on treating mental illness and indirectly preventing suicide. That's a pretty big deal.
So Manfred is like Dr. Oz, and Laszlo is like Dr. Phil.
Does Dr. Oz ever do anything that works? I don't know. All I remember about Dr. Oz is
a lot of supplements.
And describing the shape of your poops, and I couldn't.
No, here's the deal. This is really hard to track down. What's really interesting is that, and I have so much more respect for the Dollop guys at this point, because researching this kind of stuff is really hard. There are hundreds of articles about these guys, but they're all behind paywalls. So I really, and these old research journals, it's like $40 an article, and you don't even know what the hell you're going to get in there. So I did pay to get the Times article, the couple of Times articles, right? But so there was a tremendous amount of discussion around these two. What it looks like is that at some point Laszlo got wind of what Manfred was doing, and believed that the seizure component had some merit, not the putting people in a coma. Laszlo kind of thought the seizure thing made sense, and then started putting the connection together with the epilepsy and schizophrenia, the fact that they're very rare to occur at the same time, and then started experimenting with the convulsants. The use of convulsant medications, which had really good results in treating catatonia, which they had nothing. They had nothing at all that could treat catatonia. That was a huge step forward, right? And then that led to the development of ECT. And also people started paying attention that drugs could in fact help treat mental illness. So within short order following this, you start seeing things like Thorazine. You see the minor tranquilizers like Valium coming out, right? So we started learning that in fact medications could help. And we started to take a real approach that in fact that people fighting mental illness weren't just people that were choosing to be wacky or deficient or in some way weaker. That in fact these illnesses had brain connections, and that we could do real medical treatment to try to make things better. And that's a big step forward, right?
That is excellent. We are literally in the last 2 minutes for final thoughts. I'm gonna stop you there because that was perfect. Chris Maxwell, final thoughts.
Final thoughts. I mean, I'm stealing this totally from what Bart was just saying, but we should be doing everything we possibly can to treat things like mental health issues and depression and thoughts of suicide. We should be thinking, and this goes back to our episode with Lisa Sullivan as well. We should be thinking way outside the box. We should be thinking 10, 15, 20 years down the line as to how we can attack this problem, and not really try to limit ourselves. think about what we can do, and then just do it.
Tony Wood.
The story of innovation is often messy. The 20th century is filled with this in mental health. I encourage you all to, if you're interested, there's some great books that cover how Thorazine became popular and the lobotomies that were immediately previous to it. Fascinating reading. But thank goodness these men were excited about this, and that they cared enough about patients and cared enough about innovation to fight the battle. Because without them, we would still be in that same spot. We've got a lot of progress to make, but we stand on the shoulders of giants.
And just my final thoughts are, we had two very different kinds of people getting us in very close to the same direction. One with a certain amount of recklessness and disregard for the deaths of his patients, and who incidentally and scarily made money.
A lot of money.
Not paying attention to that. And then we had a person being careful and cautious and ethical who sort of gets a similar direction and doesn't make as much money. I'm not sure that there's a great morality tale in there for psychologists who are interested in profit. But I will say there's a wonderful point about innovation, and also that well-behaved linear innovation that looks tasteful and wonderful and a straight line towards wellness is probably not the way history has happened. And I have to say, from where you started with the story to how we ended on the very, very clear and serious point, check out the Dollop. A lot of the podcasts work exactly that way. If you liked this format, tweet us back. Bart Andrews will kill me for this because it was a little production heavy, but this is a very interesting way to use history to help us, give us a lens for considering current dilemmas, like, for example, using data science to let us know how far away your suicide attempt is going to be. That we have had another hour. It's SPSM. It happened again. Next week, we have some very special guests who are some technology developers, and we're going to be talking about innovation, which is what this show really is about, innovation with the aim of preventing suicide. You've done it another week. It's good to see you. Everybody have a great time.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.